more from a first-hand and experience and less from an academic experience. I assume that both Anwar and Thair will also be doing that because I know of their personal engagement. We'll be talking about the shifting priorities of the Palestinian citizens in Israel. That's also a moving target. What was the priority 4 years ago is definitely not the priority today. We've gone through a number of dynamics that are affecting the mindset and the priorities of Arab citizens in Israel. Once it was one thing, today it's completely another thing. And we'll talk about the impact of the digital politics, disinformation, and security narratives. This is where we have those wonderful two specialists with us, and the possibilities of a political, what I call political shared society, less on the social economic aspects. When we talk about Jewish-Arab relations in Israel, I like to draw two axes. One is the vertical discourse, the political discourse about political engagement and political equality, all the way to from voting to participation in governance, to participation in a coalition. That's the vertical discourse. The horizontal discourse is social economic issues. We're going to touch less on social economic issues today, touch less on the horizontal aspect, unless those issues are affecting the priorities when we come to speak about voting. So we have about half an hour, as I said, between us. Let's start with the opening round. I hope both Thayer and Anwar will be very helpful in giving relatively short answers so we can cover the many questions that we thought we'd like to touch on. But we'll have time to widen the discussion more when we feel that. First, I want to go to Thayer and ask you the question. What's the most important political dynamic right now among the Palestinian Arab citizens in Israel? Can you help us set some kind of a political landscape?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Muhammad, and thank you, Progressive Partners for Israel, for having me today. It's not my first time with you, but I've always enjoyed these kind of engagements. And also as a participant, I have participated in the past in many events. The truth of the matter is, in every single election, in every single country, there's always this talk about the upcoming election being the most consequential election in a country's history. And you guys also know that very well from US politics. That being said, I do really believe that this election is the most consequential election in Israel's history. I think there's a consensus in Israel on this issue, but there's also a consensus in the Arab community on this matter, and it shows. It shows in when you look at data, the willingness of voters to come out and vote in elections. Polls have shown recently that roughly 50% of voters tend to vote in elections. Now, when it comes to the Arab community, there's a difference between those that say they tend to vote and the overall number of voters at the end of the campaign. Usually it rises by 10 to 15%. So if 50% say that they tend to vote in this election, that means we'll most likely hit the 65% mark, which in Arab terms at least is extremely high. Ever since 1999, we have always been under 70% turnout rate. In most elections, it was under 55% turnout rate. So if we reach 65%, that says a lot. And the reason for that is the dynamics that are taking place at the moment. The Arab community feels that this government, I guess I won't surprise many of you, is by far the worst government in Israel's history. There is a feeling that if in the past governments overlooked the Arab community or were maybe lackadaisical in their approach towards fixing problems in the Arab community, now we're dealing with a government that sees us as the enemy, as an extension of the enemy. And with the atmosphere that has been created ever since October 7th, there is this attempt to, Smotrich uses his decisive plan with the Palestinians. You can think of a decisive plan with the Arab Palestinian minority in Israel as well. Itamar Ben-Gvir very famously on October 9th, 2023, came out with his Guardians of the Wall 2 speech, where he said just 2 days after the massacre that the Arab community in Israel is preparing its own attack against the Jewish community, and therefore we should be vigilant. Obviously, the Shabak came out and said that none of that is true and there's nothing going on. Quite the opposite. Arab communities started organizing with humanitarian aid for the refugees that came out of the Gaza envelope area to central Israel and other places in the country. But the most important issue is that there is this feeling of being under attack. So we see house demolitions have rised exponentially over the last 4 years. Government policy, discriminatory government policies have increased. And then we have the number one issue for the Arab community, which is organized crime and violence. The number of homicide rates in our community have more than doubled under Ben Gvir's rule as Minister of National Security. And there isn't even a serious attempt to try and solve the issue. And just 48 hours ago, it had become official that this government intends to use the Shabak, basically internal security, which usually deals with matters of national security, to use it in the Arab community to kind of fight organized crime. But nobody believes it will be there to counter organized crime, but it will actually be there to kind of create this environment of a police state within the Arab community in Israel. So there is this genuine fear on the one hand, and this feeling that we are dealing with a government that sees us as an enemy and wants to treat us as such, and therefore we need to utilize all of our civic capabilities and responsibilities, and the best way to do that is to go out and vote. I'm not going to be very long. Go ahead. Sorry.
I know. So I'm going to, first of all, thank you for initiating the stop. I was just about to stop you, but I think if we keep this pace, it will be wonderful. Anwar, if you can stay with the same theme, the most important political dynamics right now in within the Palestinian Arab community, but if you can also add some kind of structural issues, gender-related issues, the social media and its dimensions and how that comes across. Specifically, that we know this affects certain segments of population differently than other segments in the population.
Yes, thank you, Thayer. You kind of covered a lot, but I think one of what I want to add is thinking about what's happening at the Jewish kind of voter level, public opinion level, and the Arab public opinion level. And we see that amongst Arab voters, the polls are showing us that they're more interested in becoming part of the government, even though they understand that this is not the most effective and it's not going to cause like major changes, but they know that representation is important. And we saw that with the current government and how the situation has gotten even worse than it was before their election, or before Ben Gvir and Smotrich and all of them became part of the governing coalition. But also we have on the opposite side, amongst the Jewish community, there is a rejection for the inclusion of Arab Party. And that puts a lot of political parties, Zionists and non-Zionists, in a tough position. Because if you're fighting over vote, you're a non-Zionist party fighting over vote, the main community that you're targeting are non-Zionists, which is a small number of Jewish members of the Jewish community, plus the Arab community. But also we have Arab parties that are competing for these votes, and they're competing amongst themselves. So we saw the tension between the joint list. Now Ram is refusing to join the joint list for a variety of reasons. One of them is they want more flexibility to be able to join any government coalition, even though we know this is not guaranteed as well because of all the discussions that we're seeing. Like, for instance, Lapid has clearly stated he won't include Arab parties. Eisenkot saying, okay, well, he's not denying that, but he's maybe thinking something from the outside. He's also getting attacked by Bibi, calling him like there's no government. Eisenkot can form a government without Arabs, as an insult, obviously. Bibi is not even attempting to reach the Arab community these days. And then we have the Democrats, Golan and all of them, but they're talking about Ram more publicly. And now they're competing with Arab parties over Arab votes. And I think this is a dynamic that we shouldn't undermine, that they are trying to target the Arab community. I've been in Al-Fahim for a few days. I came to visit, and honestly, I've heard that like Democrats being mentioned a few times amongst people who are not even well educated about what's happening. Like, say my mom's friends in their groups, and I'm like, oh wow, this is interesting that they're discussing that, and not Hadash, not the joint list, not Ram, not any of these Arab parties. So I think it's important to pay attention to what's going to happen, what kind of voters are going to vote, or who are they gonna target, and how that's gonna affect voter turnout, but also the results as well, the number of seats in the Knesset that each party gets. The other thing, mentioning youth, actually one of the I want to get the number, but it's over 600,000 new voters. These are like between 18 and 22. in Israel,
That's in the overall population, not
overall Jewish and Arab. But in Israel, the Jewish community tends these voters tend to vote right, unlike let's say in the United States and Europe, who tend to be more on the left side, left leaning side of issues, and that's going to cause a problem. These are people that came to political consciousness around like October 7th and a lot of major issues, and that's how they view the world through a securitized lens, and that's going to shape the issue. Additionally, we see that these youth, especially in the Arab community, they get their news through social media. I think 66%. I don't know if you saw the IDI report, get their news through social media. They get, they're being recruited through social media. They're being targeted through social media. And I don't think the community has the ability and capability to decipher disinformation, understand what they're saying. I've been seeing a lot of Russian stuff on there too that are fascinating to see. So it's interesting to see how these parties are going to utilize social media, but other forces are going to utilize social media to recruit and target people. But also we have the debate within these like anti-Zionist, Arab slash shared or mixed parties. We know that there's a new party forming that everybody's going to talk about probably. It's like a place for all, I think the English name for it. And there's a huge debate about, okay, well, it is legitimate for them to create this party. It's an alternative form that everybody's looking for, but is this the right timing? What would that do to voter turnout? What would that do to like other Arab or parties that could help the Arab community being able to be elected?
So Anwar, let's hold on this thought because I think I would like to build on the foundation that both you and Thayer have created before we go into the additional competition on the Arab vote. Let's talk about the fragmentation that we're experiencing within the Arab political parties. We have four parties that everyone was hoping that they will go into one joint list, as it happened in the past twice. And that's when they scored once 15 and once 13. And now we're closer to three political parties that will run in the upcoming elections out of those four, that they might end up with three political parties. And I want to remind everyone, just in the last elections, we were close to having two political parties until I would say the 90th minute. We're still in the Mondial, in the World Cup, and that the term the 90th minute is the last minute in the game. The split between Balad from one end and Hadash and the Arab Movement for Change happened actually in the last 15 minutes, just before submitting the documents to the elections committee in the Knesset. So Thayer, try to help us, first of all, help us explain if there are really ideological diversifications between the different political parties. Are there really ideological differences, or are they just egos of leaders, or are they reflective of voter political mindset, or are these leaders trying to really reflect what they feel from the street, or are they trying to lead in different ideological directions? Let's first you and then Anwar try to put some kind of an order within the ideological and voter behavior.
Sure. So just very quickly to refer to the title of today's session, The Return of the Joint List. Anyone who's been following Arab politics closely is quite aware that the joint list was not going to return, at least in the format of the four parties. The Ra'am party has its own, I wouldn't even say only ideology, but political project going, for the next few years. And it was quite clear that Mansour Abbas, the leader of the Ra'am party, was not interested from the very beginning. It was only societal pressure that forced him in January of this year to announce that he is returning to the joint list. But once we got closer to the actual negotiations of reforming the joint list, he found his way out. And the reason for that is he wants to join a governing coalition, and he knows it will be much, much harder to join a governing coalition if he enters the Knesset through the joint list, basically vote. So he has his own independent party, which will lead a much more moderate campaign, moderate in Jewish Zionist terms. In Israel, he won't be, criticizing state institutions or the establishment as the other Arab parties will. So we will have two lists running against each other in this election.
Let me be more specific. He will refrain from attacking the Jewish nature of the state of Israel, basically accepting the Jewish dominance as a national hierarchy. We're giving it sort of some kind of hierarchy for the Jewish nature of the state, accepting the Jewish the flag, the national anthem, even the nation state law, not
Mhm.
challenging those kind of hegemonic kind of structure of the state, but also, I would say, not allowing himself to touch on the cross-border Israeli-Palestinian issue.
Exactly. And I was going to mention that he's going to try his best not to talk about Israel Palestine, definitely not criticize the IDF. He wants to be accepted by the mainstream of the Jewish Zionist community in Israel. And therefore, he's going to lead a very different campaign than the traditional Arab campaigns. Regarding ideological diversity in the Arab community, obviously, ideological diversity does exist. But if you're a nominal Arab voter and you're looking at these three parties, you can't really tell what the difference is. And the reason for that is that the Knesset is probably not the best place to express these ideological differences. When it comes to the relationship between the Arab community and the state of Israel, these parties, largely speaking, they might pronounce different things, but largely speaking, they're more or less on the same track. They refuse the Zionist nature of the state. They're demanding for more equality within the state. They think that the main problem when it comes to Arab-Jewish relations is the lack of inequality and statutory discrimination that exists within Israel. And the fact that especially Hadash and Balad being secular parties make it really hard for them to differentiate themselves to the nominal Arab voter. For the Ra'am party, it might be a little bit easier because they have this religious and more conservative background to them. But even for them, I mean, at the end of the day, the Arab parties vote 97, 98% the same when it comes to votes within the Knesset. So it becomes really hard for the average Arab voter to see a difference between them. And I would argue that the Arab voter is not interested in the ideological differences between the Arab parties when it comes to them representing them in the Knesset. There are other venues to express these differences, whether it's the High Follow-up Committee, which is the umbrella organization for the Arab community. And there are some parties that are actually demanding that the High Follow-up Committee turns into some form of Arab parliament where, these differences can come into play. The Arab voter wants a representation in front of the state. He's not looking for ideological differences in representation in front of when it comes to the Arab state. So the ideological differences are really elite based. They interest the elite in the Arab Palestinian community in Israel. They don't really interest the Arab voter. And I would argue this is what makes Mansour Abbas, the Ra'am party, more popular or more attractive to many Arab voters, because unlike the traditional Arab parties that continue using more traditional slogans, he's actually presenting something different. He's saying, I actually want to influence policy in Israel. I understand that you, the average Arab voter, doesn't really care about the differences between me and Hadash on religion and state, because at the end of the day, when it comes to religion and state, Ra'am nor Hadash really have the ability to influence state behavior. But we do have the ability to influence state behavior when it comes to allocation of budgets to local councils, to Arab local councils in Israel. It does. We are able to influence, crime and violence, how much the state will invest actually in combating organized crime and violence, which is the number one issue for the community. So when it comes to real life issues, Ra'am actually has a plan, and that's what makes them attractive. While the Arab parties are still in this, elite-based discussion and narrative that doesn't really interest the average Arab voter.
So let me take this and present it to Anwar. Thayer says Ram has a plan. Does that mean that the others do not have a plan? Are they just expressing anger and frustration and just, forever in opposition? We've seen Hadash being some kind pragmatic during the Rabin period, in 1992 to 1996. They actually did not join the coalition, but together with the Democratic Arab Party, they became what was called then preventive bloc, some kind of a safety net arrangement, even better arrangement than what Mansour Abbas had, because he went into the previous coalition without signing a written agreement. While Democratic Arab Party and Hadash at the time during Rabin period, they signed a 28-point agreement, and it was very much like an annex to the coalition agreement, which was on the table and it was even voted on and approved in the Knesset, while Mansour Abbas's joining the coalition was some kind of a handshake deal that was never really seen as obvious. Now, does the fragmentation in the Arab community tie to the fragmentation in the Israeli Jewish political scene? I mean, is it true that Mansour Abbas is willing to go in any government, for example, including a right-wing government? Do the rest of the Arab political parties position themselves left of the Democrats and not somewhere in the same political scene like the Democrats, being willing to engage in a center-left kind of arrangement, such as a preventive block arrangement?
So I have to say, I'm actually noticing a lot of pragmatic shifts on all different fronts from the Arab community as well, like from the Arab parties in general, Arab slash, Hadash, you call it an Arab party, but they have Jewish members. And that's what I'm going to say. There's like a move now, for instance, Ram, the way they're shifting from an Islamic party to like more like Muslim Democrats, right? More like that we think of Nahda in Tunisia rather than the Muslim Brotherhood for a variety of reasons. One of them, they're now disconnecting from the southern branch of the Islamic movement because one, as like the political project is becoming as like separate now from the social religious project. Two, because Netanyahu is aiming to target them in the name of terrorism, linking them to the Muslim Brotherhood, trying to disqualifying them, and Abbas is trying to push himself away from that, even though we know northern branch and southern branch of the Islamic movement are totally different. They separated in the 90s because the southern branch wanted to participate in politics while the northern branch said no. So that's interesting because they're trying to actively kind of separate, and that's a very typical way of survival for religious parties that eventually like or parties that emerge out of religious movements that eventually separate the political movement from the social slash kind of one that is dealing with society. You see Abbas saying that they're open to having Jewish candidates. We saw Balad elected somebody Jewish to be on the list. I think number five, Orly is number five on the
Correct.
list. Five, yeah.
Correct.
We see Yusuf Jabarin directly talking to Jewish voters, and they're trying to get more Jewish voters to vote. So I see a shift in like more pragmatic thinking about who to target, how to target, and kind of who they're reaching out to. And I think that's important to pay attention to. And I also think these shifts, one, are they're kind of inspired by the fact that we had a very horrible government and we saw that the strategies that they've used before are not really working, right? These parties, but also because it's becoming even worse these days, and it's becoming more severe to the point that the only way to affect change is through radical change, and voters are asking for it. They know that voters are asking for it. They know that they are frustrated. So the shift is there. And I think what Mansour Abbas is doing, okay, some people might ask the question is it worth it? What did he achieve from the first partnership, right? A lot of people are asking these questions. And it only was short-lived. It was a year-long thing. A lot of these projects were canceled, they were derailed, things got worse, but we really didn't have enough time to see if it worked or not. I tried to reserve judgment on how effective they were because we didn't have enough time to see if they worked or not. And I think it's important that we're seeing these shifts, and that means that we're paying more attention to what people want and also the political dynamics in the region and the political dynamics in the country. And post October 7th situation is really, has shifted things, and the tides are turning public opinion wise, globally, who you're targeting donor wise. Like a lot of these parties are also trying to talk to outsiders in order to bring in money. And that's very important. A Place for All is one of the parties that is doing that very effectively. They have Natalie Portman now on one of their Zoop webinars. So it's fascinating to also see how much they're paying attention to outsiders as well, and how they're trying to recruit that and bringing it in. So do they have severe ideological difference? Maybe on societal issues, yes, they do. When it comes to political context, like their votes are going to be similar. Yet if you're part of a coalition government, of course, you're restricted by what you can do and what you can say. For instance, I think Ram was under fire for having to vote for the law that extends emergency rule over the West Bank and Gaza. Like these things are very tough, and people don't support that. So there are situations where you have to make votes that go against what the community want and against what you probably think should happen. But it is out of political pragmatism that could sacrifice a lot, but also could bring some benefits to the community that otherwise would be more marginalized.
Great. I want to move into something a bit, this will be the last topic or the last theme we discuss among ourselves, and then we'll open it up for the rest of the audience. But, fragmentation doesn't happen in a vacuum. The communities themselves are changing. The Palestinian Arab community is changing. The younger generation is looking at the world differently than the older generation. The issues of employment are very, very different. For example, the percentage of Arab women in the labor market tripled itself in the last generation, 20 years. It jumped from in 2007, only 17% of Arab women worked. Today, it's almost 53%. Universities. About 23 years ago, in 2003, when the Oil Commission was written, about only less than 4% of the students in Israeli universities were Arab. Today, we're 20% of the student population, 23% of the engineering students in Israeli universities, 55% of the pharmacists. There is a development of a middle class within the Arab community that engages with the Israeli Jewish community differently than the farming community in the past or than the construction workers in the past that were providing elementary low-level services to the Jewish community. And now we see the doctors that are 24% of the doctors in Israeli hospitals. So there are significant changes that are happening within the Arab community. And I want to bring a piece of data from research of Professor Tamar Herman that she says when she asks Arab citizens, where do you want to see Israel's future? Do you want Israel to be tied with Western culture or to Middle Eastern culture? 75 to 78% say Western culture. I mean, that's not typical Arab traditional community. But at the same time, they, as Tara said, big chunk would vote for traditional political party, which is Ram, religious party, Islamist party, that every time try to wear another level of cloth to try to disguise that. So in the last elections, on the previous elections, they brought Mazen Ghanem, the mayor of Sakhnin, to say that we're not only religious. Today, Anwar, you said this time they're trying to bring in a Jewish person on the list and maybe Christian person. They're talking about a young man called Ala Ghantus that might actually be one of on their list to say we're not only just an Islamist party. Balad is bringing Orly Noy, a Jewish woman. Uh, this is reflecting maybe generational shift, maybe realpolitik shift, maybe a new mindset. I refer to it as an Israel political Israelization of the Arab community. We begin wanting to play the full Israeli political game, even if it doesn't really fit exactly the traditional identity of the community. I think it does show some kind of confusion or an evolution. Pick the word that you want, but try to help us understand. I'll start with you, Anwar. The social priorities and how they affect the strategies of the parties when they come to compete for the votes of the Arab community. Is Mansour Abbas going to, for example, target only the Bedouin community and only Muslims and just decorate his list with one or two non-Muslim figures? Is Hadash and Balad, are they going to just do that or do it with targeting their traditional classical population when we saw that in the previous elections, the Balad targeted a completely different group. They wanted Sami Abu Shadi. They made him more like a rock star and less a politician. Let's have a few minutes to talk about this because we don't really have much time before we open it up. I'll start with you, Anwar.
Yeah, so I think it's fascinating to talk about what the community and the trends that are happening with the community, call it confusion or evolution. I think it's just a normal process because we're experiencing citizenship. I was born right in a context. My generation was born in a context where we've been Israeli citizens. We vote when the election. Hopefully, we vote in the elections. We go to universities, and we're part of that society. But also, when we have a problem with gun violence, problem with economic issues, with house demolition, all of that, we try to use state institutions first, even though we know sometimes they fail. And we know, like a lot of us despite the problems with the Supreme Court, we kind of still have a decent amount that trust the Supreme Court as an institution that, let's say you want to disqualify Arab parties, okay, we know the Supreme Court is going to overturn it. And that happened historically, like multiple times, right? So there is some trust in these institutions themselves. And as citizens, when it comes to services, we do understand our citizenship as like based on these relationship to state and services, public services. But culturally, we're Palestinian. Religiously, a lot of us are Muslims. We have Christians, we have Druze, etc. So it depends on that cultural identity as well. And I don't call it a confusion. I think it happens in multiple contexts and multiple communities, and multiple countries around the world have different communities that understand themselves a bit differently than the state or the majority of people in the state. Now, when it comes to parties, they're obviously paying attention, and they have to pay attention. They can't not pay attention. It's costly not to pay attention, right? And I'm glad we're moving away from ideological purity to pragmatism. That's something that we need to learn. Honestly, Netanyahu is a master at doing that, right? He's a master at like,
That's
okay,
right.
I disagree with you. It's fine. I'll take your money. I'll like play your game, and then I'll use that to my own benefit. And I think we need to learn something from that. Is that sometimes ideological purity is not going to get us to where we want to go, and it's going to prevent us from achieving progress. And sometimes incremental progress is better than nothing or going backward, right? And I think that's important. I'm glad that people are paying attention to these things. And one thing, I think I am more concerned right now about like people like the Democrats targeting Arab voters and how that's going to affect the results and the number of seats for Arab party and representation, then the Arab community kind of not showing up to vote. It's just who they're voting for and who's like trying to extend their hands to get those votes. Because think about it, if you're like as in like you're like, I don't want to have Arab parties, and there's a recent poll that showed they can actually pull it off without Arab parties. I think that was the most recent one from last night. But if the easy way to do that is to get more votes from the Arab community rather than having to go to Arab parties and say, hey, could you like come? Could we like have a mutual agreement with you? And even though we know a lot of our voters don't appreciate you. And they're going to probably target this, like what are they called, soft right? They're the people who move between camps depending every election. So I think it's important for Arab parties to pay attention that there's also Jewish constituency that really wants to have that shared community, shared political action. They're fed up with what's happening, and we need to target those in addition to younger population, our younger kids, the ones who are on social media. That's why Sami Bashari, they needed to create like a persona like Trump did, right? Where he's becoming this important element that people can get exposed to through social media, the few minute clicks, the few minutes videos, seconds, in order to get people involved and engaged in the political questions and the importance of these political questions and voting, and why the movement on these parties and representation is important. So I think kind of all of it goes into the question of kind of the identity, the fragmentation, paying attention to these shifts. It's very natural, it's smart, and I think we should kind of continue paying attention to that and developing that pragmatism in a way that will serve us without having to compromise too much, but we are going to have to make compromises.
All right, great. Thank you. Tahir?
Yeah, so I actually agree with you, Mohammed. I think the number one variable to understand this new generation is through class lens, and I don't mean the Marxist class lens here. We do have, for the first time in our history, a middle class, and this middle class is making middle class demands. Yair Lapid became very popular in Israeli politics with a slogan, "Where's the money?" He used that back in 2013. And you now have many young Arabs asking the same question, where's the money? Or in our case, how do we influence politics? And therefore, these more traditional slogans about steadfastness and holding on to our identity are secondary right now. That doesn't mean people have given up on their identity. There's a new young generation that feels comfortable with its Palestinian identity, but also with its Israeli identity, and it wants to integrate into the economic fabric of the state of Israel. And once you integrate into the economic fabric, and as you mentioned, Muhammad, we have seen over the last generation an increase in visibility, in employment, in gaining capital, etc., etc. Now there are those that want basically our political parties to integrate into the political fabric. And by the way, it's not only Ra'am voters. I myself conducted a study for an organization here in April, and what we found is that even more than 55% of Balad voters want Balad to join a governing coalition. Balad. So that kind of shows you how we've shifted. And again, that does not mean
That's why I
people.
call it confusion sometimes.
You can, but at the same time, I think younger generations feel much more comfortable within the reality they live in than older generations who faced a very different political context than the one that they now have to live with. How do you deal with people such as Smotrich and Ben-Gvir? Is it simply just enough to go to the opposition after every election and just keep on shouting anti-establishment slogans? Has that, helped us? The modern Arab parties were created in the late 1980s, early 1990s. The Arab Democratic Party, the Ra'am Party, the Southern Branch, the Balad Party, they were all created in the late 80s, early 1990s. And for the past 30 years, they have had the same kind of politics. And it's just simply not convincing. It's not convincing for the median Arab voter. It's not convincing for voters in general, but especially for younger voters, and therefore there's a need for this new way of looking at things. I saw
Great.
your
Yeah. I'm going to start taking the questions, reading some of the questions. Some of them can be combined together, and I'm not going to take them in the order written, but in some, because I want to keep some kind of a flow of the discussion. Uh, you know, One of the questions David Abrahams asks says that low voter turnout by minorities generally represents alienation from the majority society and a sense that the majority will never do us justice. Can Palestinian Israelis see a brighter horizon at the same time that Israeli policy in the West Bank and Gaza, etc., only gets worse? And I will add another component which I would like you to relate to. Before October 7th, at Givat Haviva in our annual conference, we conduct a study towards that conference. And we call it the level of mutual trust and mutual fear. Today, I think we can call it mutual mistrust, which is increasing significantly since October 7th. And I want to try to bring the impact of October 7th and the last 3.5 years of war and the developments in Gaza and the West Bank to the discussion and their impact on voter turnout and voter choices. Today, before October 7th, the percentage of Israeli Jews that say they do not trust Arab citizens and they are afraid of Arab citizens was about 23%. Today, it's 72%. Among Arab citizens, it was 17%. Today, it's 53%. We are at the peak, at the highest peak of mutual mistrust and fear went through the worst government, and I agree with you totally, Anwar, the worst government ever that we could have had, and coming to a very dramatic test, which is this coming elections, with this background of mutual fear and mutual mistrust. So, Anwar, you want to start by commenting on that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There are structural restrictions, right? That say, okay, if I'm delusioned by the political system and institution, I think my vote doesn't matter. There are campaigns in our society to boycott the vote because a lot of people think that that legitimizes a democracy that is an ethnocracy, that is not really a full democracy for equal rights at the traditional way we view it in Western context, even in the Western questions, obviously. But then what we saw, the consequences of boycotting, the consequences of not showing up to vote, caused extreme measures. Look at the West Bank and the amount of settlements that happened under this government. Yes, it was bad before, but the amount of settlements have increased drastically. Look at the number of people being killed due to gun violence, right? We see that the number has increased drastically as well. And we see that these shifts are becoming more extreme and there are severe consequences. And honestly, one of the things that, and you might comment on that as well, that in the Arab community, one of the major things that cause people to show up more to vote is the unity among Arab parties. And like the more the joint list was united, the whole parties together, we saw a higher voter turnout and how excited people are, how the community themselves with their leadership is able to rejuvenate and excite people about coming to vote, especially young people. So I think there's that structural level, but there's also the community level and that how they interact together. And the fact that we had that horrible experience since October 7th, in addition to everything else, I think should allow or will force more people to vote just because we see the consequences on daily basis.
Great. There.
Yeah. I do accept the argument that, minorities, when they're alienated, they don't usually turn out in high numbers to vote. So what is the change here? And I think the change is actually somewhat similar to what's happening in the United States and how the United States is looking at Israel. I just think that Israel has become so extreme in her policies over the last 4 years in all fields that the response from the Arab community is a response that, okay, we actually have to be more proactive in order to defend ourselves. So if in the past, your resentment towards the state was expressed through not participating in the political process, now it's kind of reversed that you are still alienated, and by voting, you're expressing your alienation. It's just that the situation has become so extreme that the way you express your alienation is through voting in the hopes that maybe you can change the situation a little bit, especially when you contrast. So if you take Ben Gvir, for example, and his tenure at the Ministry of National Security, and you compare it with the previous government, it's not that the previous government was great, but if you actually look at the data, for the first time in a generation, we saw the number of homicide rates actually decrease under the change government, and then all of a sudden Ben Gvir came in, and the numbers doubled. So what conclusion do you reach? You usually reach a conclusion that you actually need to be a little bit more proactive. Or you see Israel's behavior in Gaza and the West Bank from the perspective of the Arab community. It's very clear what's going to happen. Eventually, this powder keg is going to explode in our faces all over again. Maybe in the Jewish community, it's not seen this way because the discourse is very different. But for us, especially that we're on a daily interaction with Palestinians in the West Bank, we do know the situation that's happening there. The fact that, I'll just give you a small example. School pupils in schools go to school only 3 days a week. Why? Because the Israeli government has been preventing the Palestinian Authority from receiving the taxes that Israel collects on their behalf as part of the Oslo peace agreement. That's just one example. People are not working because Palestinian laborers are not allowed in the West, inside Israel since October 7th. That leads to an explosion. So how do you deal with preventing that explosion? It's actually through going out and voting. And by the way, in Israel, because it's a very peculiar society, two contradictory things can coexist at the same time. There is greater segregation between Arabs and Jews, but at the same time, they can cooperate more. Why? Because Mansour Abbas comes with a plan where he's basically saying, I want to keep the segregated reality, but within this segregated reality, I'm looking for partnerships. I'm not looking to integrate into the greater scheme of things in Israel. And that's the difference between him and someone like Ayman Audi, for example. Ayman Audi or Hadash, and to a certain extent Balad, actually want to integrate. If you actually listen to their political program, the end game here is to integrate further into Israeli society, but full integration requires equality. That's the way Ayman Audi or Hadash or Balad would look at it, and that scares the mainstream of Jewish society in Israel. And therefore, when someone like Mansour Abbas comes and says, look, what I really want is to keep the situation as it is, segregation between Jews and Arabs, but within this segregation, let's look for, give and take politics, basically, in the same way as the Haredi community have been behaving over the last 40 years. And this is the last sentence I'll say. What the median Arab voter is looking for is to become the new Haredim. He wants the Arab parties to become the new Haredim. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we don't care if it's left or right. As long as there's somebody on the other side that's willing to cooperate with us, give us greater budgets, and to improve our lives, then we would work with them. We're willing to put the other ideological issues aside at the moment because Israel has become so extreme, so crazy. The only way to defend ourselves is by actually being more proactive.
Okay, I'm going to combine a few questions and give them some kind of a historic framework, and that will be the last questions that we relate to. Until 1996, more than 50% of the Arab voters voted for Zionist Jewish political parties. And the shift started dramatically then for a number of reasons. There was split vote. You voted for prime minister separate than political parties. And there was the development of the Democratic Arab Party and the United Arab List. So there were Arab political parties, indigenous Arab political parties, and not what we call satellite political parties that were associated with labor or with merits. And that became very attractive to the Arab voters. And we got all the way that over the last couple of elections, I would say the last three elections, more than 85% of the voters voted for Arab political parties, and only 12 to 15% would vote for the Jewish Zionist political parties. The majority of them are center-left political parties. But if you go into the Druze community and if you go into the Bedouin community, you even get votes to Shas, Likud, and other political parties. Now, what I get from the questions many are asking, will Makom Likulanu political party be attractive? Will Yair Golan, the Democrats, be attractive? What will make them more attractive? Is it just the agenda or the personas, the names on the list? Will Eisenkot be attractive? Eisenkot, I think, I know from some discussions with people around his team, they would like to get 2 seats from the Arab political voters, meaning about 60, 70,000 votes. Exactly what Labour Party received in the past, exactly what Meretz received in the past. Likud even received about 1 seat in the past from Arab political parties. Shas received in the past almost 1 seat from the Arab political parties. And there's a feeling that the collapse of the joint list, not having the 4 Arab political parties under one umbrella, will reduce the appetite for unity in the Arab community and will allow, I would say, a lot of mice to escape. When there's no umbrella, there's no closed net where we feel commitment to the uniform Arab political behavior, and people start behaving differently. Does that mean that those center left, mainly center left political parties, the non-Arab political parties, Makom Likulanu, Meretz, I'm sorry, not Meretz, Democrats, Eisenkot, Lapid, and Bennett, who are less of center and more of right, I would say. Does that mean they have a chance this time? Let's start with you, Thayer.
Okay, so I'll comment on merit on the Democrats and Makom Likulanu. I think the Democrats have a potential of being the surprise in this election in the Arab community. There's a huge buzz. I agree with Anwar completely. There's a buzz around them. I think for 2 reasons. First of all, Mansour Abbas basically legitimized the Democrats even more because the argument goes, if you really want to influence, then why don't you go directly to the horse's mouth and you're able to influence in a more influential manner, so to speak. And second of all, the Democrats have had a very successful so far campaign in the Arab community. They're the only Zionist party that's actually targeting the Arab community. I've been following them, especially on social media, and they're giving the Arab voter that feeling that we actually do care about you. Yair Golan just came out, I think, 2 or 3 days ago, and said that his goal is to get the Ministry of National Security. That's what he wants to be after the election. That's the ministry in charge of the police that would deal basically with crime and violence. And I'm pretty sure the vast majority of Arab citizens would be more than happy that someone from that kind of background would be in that kind of position. So, I mean, I think the main weakness that the Democrats have is with an Arab representative. Would they have a very strong and convincing Arab representative? Their primaries are on Monday, I believe. Will they have a strong representative, and would they be in a position, a realistic slot, basically, to join the next Knesset? That's their biggest weakness, in my opinion, at the moment. Regarding a place for all of us, I think they came into the game a little bit late. If they would have began their party 2 or 3 years ago, then maybe. As of right now, I don't see them really succeeding. I think their goal is to try and, have one to 2 seats in the polls and then go to the joint list, go to Hadash, Balad, and Ahmed Tibi's Ta'al party and tell them, look, we're worth 50,000 votes, 60,000 votes in the Arab community. Give us one slot. And the leader of that list is a woman, an Arab woman. And we must say here that the Arab parties have failed completely on this manner. There is not even one Arab woman that is in a realistic slot to be elected in the next election. A massive, massive failure, especially for Hadash and Balad that, kind of espouse a more secular, progressive outlook. And, this might be a good solution, right? That have an Arab woman in such a position. So I don't think that Makom Likulanu in this election will achieve much. At best, they might receive a reserved seat from the joint list, but I don't think the Arab parties are really interested in that. But if they do organize themselves well, a political realignment in the Arab community will happen, just like in the Jewish community it's going to happen. I just think that as long as we have Benjamin Netanyahu with us, it's very, very hard for that political realignment to start taking place. But a political realignment will eventually take place, including in the Arab community, and then a place for Makom li Kulanu becomes much more viable. One last point on Makom li Kulanu. They are the only party at this moment that has adopted the confederation solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I believe this is an issue. At the moment, it's a niche left-wing position, but it's starting to garner more and more attention, especially that everybody agrees that the two-state solution is dead, and the one-state solution isn't a realistic solution to Israel-Palestine. I won't be surprised that as we move on further, more and more people, especially in the Arab community, will start to adopt the position of confederation. So that's something also to look at and to think about as we go towards the future in Israel-Palestine.
Great. Thank you very much. Anwar, close
Yeah,
this discussion.
it's hard to go after Thayer's remark, but I do agree with a lot of the points that he made, that there is a realignment that will happen and is happening already in the community, and I look forward to seeing the results later. Now we're at a critical moment where like a place for all, Makom Likulam, could undermine some of the like some votes in the Arab community, take it away. But as my mom, using the term my mom used, burn the vote when she was talking about the Democrats. And I do think that there is a chance for parties like, for Yair Golan and his party to be able to get votes from the Arab community. I think people are frustrated and tired and like from the lack of ability to control what's happening. The fact that, we haven't been able to address gun violence, and it's an issue that everybody, all of us, are dealing with on a daily basis, knows somebody that got affected, or a neighbor or a friend or a colleague. And I think that's becoming like the part of frustration is like, what if we try to listen to these people, actually have a chance at having influence there and pushing them into paying attention to us? I mean, games and elections are fascinating because what happens is if I have demand and supply, like that's how it works. There are voters who are willing to vote for me if I give them something, and I give them that thing, and they keep voting for me. So that relationship changes the dynamics and the pragmatism and the platforms that people are going to run on and the issues that they're going to focus on. And it would make sense that if more people are voting from the Arab side to these parties, then they are going to shift and shape things differently. But again, we'll see what happens. The Israeli elections are very unstable. What happens there is unpredictable. Nobody could have predicted COVID-19 or could have predicted, October 7th, could have predicted what happened in Gaza afterwards and the international response to this. So we never know. And I'm always like cautious about making huge predictions about what will happen after.
Great. First of all, I would like to thank Anwar and Thayer. You were wonderful. And I would like to add maybe one more comment that we're not sure we're really going to reach the 27th of October with the same shape of political scene. I think there will be severe efforts this time to try to prevent certain Arab political parties from running by delegitimizing them through the elections committee, which is controlled by the current political coalition. I think there will be some actions that will try to prevent Arab voters from reaching the voting stations to try to reduce the turnout. I think they're going to try to
And
even
Muhammad, sorry
limit.
to cut you. There's also a report that they're trying to control flights coming from outside to vote. Did you see
It
that?
just came in today,
Yeah.
correct? And there's, I think that they're going to try to make all kinds of obstacles on the day of elections that will prevent people from voting, but also maybe even challenge some of the candidates on the different Arab political lists, so that that people that look for the rock stars on the list will not find him. People that look for Sami Abu Shahadi, they might not find him in the list. People that want Ahmad Tibi, they might not find him in the list. People that want Mansour Abbas, they just started illegal action against him just last week. So we're in a big battle that we still don't know all the facts about it, but hopefully the public will know how to behave by voting people that are right for the moment. And the first thing that, going back to Thair's comment, the first thing is to get this government out. This is the worst government we've ever had. And the first task is to get this government out. Ron, off to you. I hope this was an interesting discussion. We tried to keep it upbeat, and both Thayer and Anwar were wonderful in doing that. Thank you
It,
very much.
it was fascinating, and you were also great, Muhammad, and thank you, Muhammad and Anwar and Zayed. Um, and I'm sure folks, I can't ask them here because it's a webinar format, but I'm sure folks found it fascinating. The the sociopolitics of Israel's Palestinian Arab community gets way too little mainstream attention. I think that's true not just in the US, but in Israel also. And even when it does, the community is monolithized. So I hope we did our small part in bringing greater depth, humanity, color, however you want to that topic today. So I want to thank folks for attending, and just a couple of quick reminders for those who missed the opening. The second annual Youth Summit is taking place August 8 to 9 at Camp Shomria in Liberty, New York, but registration closes tomorrow. You can find the registration link on social media. It's also in the chat. In the meantime, before we close up, you can take a look for that. And last but not least, while today's program has been free, generous contributions are what will allow Partners for Progressive Israel to deliver these events at no cost. Right now is a perfect time to donate. Partners is holding a 2-for-1 matching grant campaign in honor of new Executive Director Ike Salinas, who you met at the start, those of you who were there. So every dollar donated today will be tripled. If you can, please visit progressiveisrael.org. Check out upcoming programming, various things about the organization. If you can, please make a donation. Thanks again to our terrific panelists and to our audience, and I hope to see you next time. Good luck in the elections.